The day her life ended and began was a Tuesday in late October, a day of such profound and ordinary quiet that the silence itself seemed to be the blade. Alara stood in the hallway of the house her father had built, a house that smelled of his pipe tobacco and the lemon oil her mother had used on the furniture, and listened to the dry rustle of papers in the study. Her stepfather, Arthur, was a man who moved through the world on a tide of rustling paper. He was not a cruel man, not in the active sense. He was simply a man for whom life was a ledger, and she, Alara, was a final, untidy entry to be reconciled. He emerged from the study, his face a bland mask of administrative duty. He did not look at her, but at a point just over her shoulder. "The sale is complete," he said. His voice was as dry as the papers he carried. "The new owners will take possession on the 1st of the month. You will need to be gone by then." She did not cry. She did not plead. The grief for her father, 2 years gone, and her mother, 1 year gone, had already scoured her clean of such displays. There was only a hollow, ringing space in her chest where a heart was supposed to be. She had known this was coming. Arthur had married her mother in the haze of her illness, a whirlwind of practicality and paperwork that had left Alara's head spinning and her mother's name on a new will. He had been, he'd assured everyone, a comfort. Now he was an executor. "I see," she said. The words felt like pebbles in her mouth. "I have settled your mother's remaining accounts," he continued, his gaze still fixed on the wall behind her. He held out a thin envelope. "This is what is left after all expenses. It is not a great deal, I'm afraid. Your father's ventures were not as stable as he believed." She took the envelope. It was insultingly light. Inside was a small fold of bills, a pittance, the final tally of a life of love and laughter, reduced to a number that would barely see her through a month. She said nothing. Her silence seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He finally met her eyes, a flicker of something she could not name, annoyance, perhaps, or a vestige of shame, before it was gone. "You are 26, Alara. You are resourceful. Your father made sure of that." It was the closest he could come to a kindness, and it was still a dismissal. She nodded, the motion stiff and robotic. Yes, he did. Her father. He had been a man of substance, a man who believed in the tangible world. He was a civil engineer, a surveyor for the great railroad companies that had stitched the country together with steel. He had not taught her needlepoint or piano. He had taught her the language of the land. He had taught her how to read a contour map, how to calculate the stress load of a truss bridge, how to true a timber with an adze. He taught her that the world was governed by laws of physics and integrity, and that a straight line and a true level were things a person could build a life on. She spent the rest of the day packing. It did not take long. She had few possessions of real value, and even fewer of sentimental worth, for the house itself had been the vessel of her sentiment. She packed a canvas satchel with 2 changes of sturdy clothes, a whetstone, a small collection of drafting tools, and the worn leather-bound copy of her father's engineering manuals. Then she went to the closet in the hall. There, in its custom-made crate of oiled oak, was her only true inheritance. It was her father's K&E Transit theodolite. It was a thing of heavy, lacquered brass and gleaming lenses, a complex instrument of breathtaking precision. On its vernier scale, one could measure an angle to within a fraction of a degree. To her father, it had not been a tool. It had been an oracle. It told the truth. It revealed the hidden shape of the world, the unwavering line of gravity, the immutable curve of the earth. He had let her use it from the time she was a girl, her small hands learning the delicate, firm touch required to level the tripod and focus the crosshairs. "The world can lie to you, Ellie," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "People will lie to you. But the plumb bob always points to the center of the earth. The bubble in the level always tells you what's true. Trust the tools." She hefted the crate. It was heavy, a solid, reassuring weight against her hip. This was all of him she had left. This, and the knowledge he had poured into her. This was her competence, her salvation. She walked out of the house without looking back. She did not say goodbye to Arthur. She simply closed the front door quietly behind her and walked down the path her father had laid with river stones, each one chosen and set by his own hands. At the end of the street, she did not turn. She kept walking toward the train station, the brass-bound crate in one hand, the satchel in the other, and the insultingly small roll of bills tucked deep in her pocket. The train carried her west, away from the green, orderly hills of her childhood, and into the vast, raw emptiness of the high plains. The world grew larger, the sky wider. The neat geometry of towns and farms dissolved into a landscape of stark, geological truth. It was a land of rock and dust and distance, a place that did not care for names or pedigrees. It cared only for water and endurance. Ilara watched it all slide past the window, and for the first time in a year, the hollow space in her chest felt less like a wound and more like an echo of the landscape outside. There was a freedom in such emptiness, a chance. She rode the train for 3 days, until the main line ended, and a smaller spur line began. She took that, and then a rattling coach, and then, finally, she was on foot, following a dusty track that the locals called a road. She was heading for the county seat of a territory so vast and sparsely populated that it was mostly just lines on a map. She had no destination, only a direction, a way. The county seat was a clapboard town, huddled against the wind, smelling of dust and coal smoke. It was a place of practicalities. In the county records office, a room that smelled of dry paper and stale cigars, she waited while a clerk with a green eyeshade attended to a pair of ranchers. The ranchers were loud, laughing as they signed a deed. "You really offloading that useless plot, Tom," one of them boomed. The other, a man with a sun-cured face, grinned. "County's been on me about the back taxes for a decade. Figure I'll let some other fool have it. Maybe they can sell the ghosts." "What ghosts are those?" the first man asked, winking at the clerk. "The ghosts of Terminus," the clerk said, his voice laced with the weary amusement of a man who has heard the story 1,000 times. "The town the railroad paid to forget. They say old Silas Kane still walks Main Street at night, looking for his silver." Ilara's attention sharpened. A town, an entire town. "It's a wasteland," the rancher named Tom said, pocketing his papers. "Railroad pulled out 60 years ago. Died overnight. Nothing left but foundations and dust. The county's been trying to sell the whole damn town site for 20 years, just to clear the books." "How much?" Ilara heard herself ask. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the men's laughter. The 3 men turned to look at her. They saw a young woman, slender and plainly dressed, with dust on her boots and a seriousness in her eyes that seemed out of place. The clerk, a man named Henderson, eyed the heavy brass-bound crate at her feet. "How much for the town site?" she repeated. Henderson leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. "Well, seeing as it's a genuine piece of historical folly, cursed by man and God, and home to nothing but rattlesnakes and bad memories, the county is prepared to part with the deed for the princely sum of $150 to cover the outstanding tax lien." The exact amount in her pocket. Every last dollar. It was absurd. It was madness. It was a sign. The ranchers snorted with laughter. "Lady, you'd be better off throwing that money in a fire," Tom advised. "It'd keep you warm for a minute at least." Ilara ignored them. She looked at the clerk. "I'll take it." The smirk on Henderson's face faltered, replaced by disbelief. "You'll... what?" "I will purchase the deed to the town of Terminus," she said, her voice steady. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the roll of bills. She counted them carefully onto the dusty counter. $150. the last vestiges of her old life, traded for a ghost town. Henderson stared at the money, then at her. He shook his head slowly, a grin of pure, mocking pity spreading across his face. "Your funeral, miss. The deed will be in your name. All of it. Every dusty street and every collapsed hovel." He began to fill out the paperwork with a theatrical flourish, as if participating in a grand joke. As she signed her name, Elara Vance, on the crisp new deed, she felt a strange, cold thrill. She was no longer adrift. She was anchored. She was the sole proprietor of a wasteland, the queen of a pile of ruins. It was a kingdom of nothing, but it was hers. The journey to Terminus took another 2 days on foot, with her supplies and the heavy theodolite strapped to a mule she'd purchased with the last of her pocket change. The road dwindled from a wagon track to a faint impression in the sagebrush. The landscape grew harsher, stonier. She was following an old survey map she'd bought in the county seat, a faded blueprint of a dream. She saw it first at dusk, from the top of a low mesa. It was not a town. It was a scar, a grid of unnaturally straight lines drawn on the land, barely visible under the shifting dust. A wide main street, flanked by the skeletal remains of buildings, their wooden bones bleached white by the sun. It looked like the excavated skeleton of some great beast that had died in agony. A wave of profound, crushing despair washed over her, so powerful it made her knees weak. The clerk's mocking laughter echoed in her ears. What had she done? She had traded her last dollars for a grave. She stood there as the sun bled out across the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that made the ruins look like they were reaching for her. She was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. The wind whispered through the empty window frames, a low, mournful sound. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air cold and thin. She could turn back. She could admit defeat. But then she looked down at the crate containing her father's transit. Trust the tools. Her father's voice, a calm anchor in the storm of her panic. A surveyor did not run from a piece of land. A surveyor assessed it, understood it. She squared her shoulders and led the mule down the gentle slope and onto what had once been Main Street. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the whisper of the wind. She walked the length of the street, her eyes taking in the details. The foundations were stone, expertly laid. The street itself was wide, far wider than necessary for a simple mining camp. This place had been built with ambition. It had been built to last. At the far end of the street stood the one building that was more than a skeleton, the railroad depot. It was a simple, powerful structure of dressed sandstone blocks, its roofline low and solid against the darkening sky. Its slate roof was mostly intact, its windows boarded over. It was a fortress. It was shelter. She spent the first week making the depot habitable. She pried the boards from the windows, letting dusty shafts of light pierce the gloom. The air inside was thick with the smell of dry rot and sleeping dust. She swept out the nests of pack rats, the fine silt of 60 years of neglect. The main waiting room was large, with a high ceiling and a great stone fireplace. The station master's office became her workshop, the ticket office her kitchen. She found a hand pump well behind the station. After hours of priming and coaxing, it coughed up a rusty stream of water that eventually ran clear and cold. It tasted of stone and deep earth. It tasted of life. With a secure place to live, her despair began to recede, replaced by a quiet, methodical purpose. She was a builder's daughter. She knew what to do with ruins. You started with the foundation. Her foundation was this town. She needed to understand it. She retrieved her father's transit. Setting up the tripod on the packed earth of Main Street, she felt a sense of homecoming, the familiar weight of the brass instrument, the smooth, oiled turn of the leveling screws, the crisp click of the clamps. It was a liturgy. She leveled the tripod, centered the bubble and sighted down the main thoroughfare. She had the original town survey from the county office. It was a beautiful piece of drafting, showing every planned lot, every street, every elevation down to the inch. It was a blueprint for a perfect town. Her father had taught her that a good surveyor respects the work of those who came before, but he had also taught her to verify everything, trust, but measure. She began her own survey, starting at the depot and working her way east along Main Street. She took readings every 50 feet, driving stakes and making meticulous notes in her logbook. It was slow, painstaking work. The sun beat down on her back. The wind tugged at her papers. But in the focused world of the eyepiece, in the precise alignment of crosshairs on a distant rod, she found a deep and abiding peace. The world simplified to lines and numbers, to truth. It was on the third day of surveying that she found it, the anomaly. She was in the center of town, where the Grand Hotel and the bank had once stood. According to the original plans, Main Street had a gentle, almost imperceptible crown for drainage, sloping down from a central high point. Her measurements confirmed this, mostly, but for a stretch of about 40 feet, right in the town's heart, her readings were off. The street here was lower than the plans indicated. Not by much, only a few inches. A subtle, shallow depression, as if the ground itself had settled. It was the kind of discrepancy most would dismiss as an error, a result of 60 years of erosion and neglect. But Alara knew her instrument, and she knew her own skill. The reading was accurate, and the depression was too uniform, its edges too clean. It wasn't natural settling, it looked engineered. Her curiosity, a trait inherited directly from her father, was piqued. She returned to the spot the next morning, not with her transit, but with a shovel and a pickaxe. The ground was hard-packed gravel and caliche, baked by decades of sun. The work was brutal. Her hands, softened by years of indoor living, blistered and bled. But she was driven by the small, insistent mystery. Why was this spot different? 3 feet down, her shovel struck something that was not rock. It made a dull, hollow thud. Wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Carefully, she scraped away the dirt and gravel. She uncovered the edge of a mass of timber, dark and heavy, treated with creosote like a railroad tie. She kept digging, her excitement growing with every shovelful. She uncovered another timber lying parallel to the first, and then another. They were laid side by side, forming a solid wooden roof. It was a lid, a door in the middle of the street. It took her the rest of the day. Using the pickaxe as a lever and every ounce of her strength, she managed to pry up one end of a single, massive timber. It groaned in protest, the sound loud in the immense silence. Peering into the darkness below, she was met with a rush of cool, dry air. It smelled not of rot or damp, but of deep, ancient dust and something else. Something metallic and clean. She retrieved a lantern from the depot and lowered herself into the opening. She found herself on a set of steep stone steps. They were perfectly cut and fitted, the work of a master mason. At the bottom was a small, stone-lined chamber, about 10 feet square. It was a vault, and it was not empty. Against one wall were stacked a dozen wooden crates, bound with iron straps. With trembling hands, she took her pickaxe and pried the lid off the nearest one. The lantern light glinted on a sea of yellow, gold coins. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened another, and another. All of them were filled with gold. It was a fortune beyond comprehension, enough to build a city, let alone a town. But on top of the last stack of crates sat something else, a heavy, iron-strapped chest. It was not locked. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet that had long since faded, was a thick, leather-bound journal and a tight roll of oilcloth blueprints. She carried the chest back up to the street, her mind reeling. She sat on the ground beside the gaping hole in Main Street, the setting sun casting her long shadow over the ruins, and opened the journal. The handwriting was a strong, clear engineer's script. The first entry was dated 1888. "My name is Silas Kane," it began. "I am the founder, chief engineer, and, I suspect, the final resident of the town of Terminus. If you are reading this, it means you have found my secret. It means you have a mind for truth, for you would not have found it otherwise. And it means my faith in the land, and in the kind of person who knows how to read it, was not misplaced." Alara read for hours as the sky turned from orange to indigo, the lantern at her side her only companion. Silas's story poured from the pages, a saga of ambition, discovery, and bitter betrayal. He had been an engineer like her father, hired by the railroad to find a path through the mountains. He designed Terminus not just as a depot, but as a future hub. While surveying the foundations, his geological tests had revealed something extraordinary: a massive, rich vein of silver ore running directly beneath the town site. It was a secret he kept, planning to use the wealth to ensure the town's prosperity for generations, but he had made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. A director on the railroad's board, a man of avarice and cunning, learned of the discovery. The railroad did not want a partner in Silas. They wanted the silver for themselves. So they orchestrated his ruin. They abruptly rerouted the main line 30 miles to the south, citing fictitious geological instabilities at the Terminus site. They spread rumors that the ground was cursed, prone to collapse. With the railroad gone, the town died. Businesses failed, people left, and Silas was bankrupted, his name discredited. He knew he was beaten, but he would not let them have his truth. In his final months, alone in the dying town, he used his remaining resources to construct this vault beneath Main Street. He moved his personal fortune, the gold, into it for safekeeping, and with it, he placed his original geological surveys and the assay reports that proved the existence and value of the silver vein. He had sealed the vault, burying the entrance under the street itself, creating a subtle flaw in the landscape that only a true surveyor would ever notice. The final entry was a plea, a last will and testament, addressed to a stranger. "I do not know who you are," Silas wrote, "but I know your character. You did not stumble upon this, you deduced it. You have a mind that sees what is, not what you are told to see. The gold is yours. It is my wager against the greed of men. But I ask one thing of you: do not let the lie stand. Use this wealth not for its own sake, but to build. Build a place of substance, a place for people who value honest work and true things. Let the world know what was done here. Let Terminus live again. The silver is still there, deep in the earth. It is the town's birthright. This is now your charge, and my blessing." Tears streamed down Alara's face, tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a profound, aching kinship. This man, dead for 60 years, understood her better than anyone alive. His story of being cast out by a cold, greedy entity mirrored her own. He had not left her mere money. He had left her a purpose. He had passed a torch. She was no longer an outcast. She was an heir. The discovery of Silas Kane's legacy transformed Alara. The hollow space in her chest was now filled with a quiet, burning resolve. She was no longer just surviving. She was building. The gold gave her the means, but Silas's journal gave her the blueprint for a soul. Her work took on a new dimension. She was not just repairing a depot. She was resurrecting a town. She traveled to the next county and hired a team of stonemasons, paying them in gold coin, a currency that spoke with unquestionable authority. They helped her restore the depot to its former glory, then started on the foundations of the old hotel. She worked alongside them, her hands growing calloused and strong, her knowledge of construction earning their quiet respect. News of the ghost town coming back to life traveled on the wind. One day, a wagon rumbled up Main Street. The driver was a man with a wild gray beard and arms as thick as fence posts. He stopped his team and watched her directing the masons, a plumb bob in her hand. "Heard someone was playing with rocks out here," he grunted. "My name's Jedediah. I'm the blacksmith over in Promise." "Ilara Vance," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Jedediah spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Vance, heard you were the one bought this pile of nothing from Henderson. He's still telling the story." He looked at the new stone walls, the neat stacks of timber, the purpose in her eyes. "Looks like the joke's on him." He paused. "I need a new well surveyed on my land. Ground's tricky, but I can reforge every piece of iron in this town. Hinges, latches, tools, whatever you need. We could trade." It was not an offer of charity. It was a proposal between professionals. "I'd like that," Ilara said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was the beginning. Jedediah became her first ally. He respected her skill, not her gender or her past. Through him, others came. Maria, a freight hauler with a no-nonsense attitude and a network that spanned the territory, began making Terminus a regular stop. She saw the gold Ilara paid with and the progress she made, and she spread the word. Terminus was real. It was a place where good work was being done. An old prospector and local historian named Elias, who knew the legends of Silas Kane, wandered in one afternoon, drawn by the sound of hammers. Ilara showed him the journal. The old man's eyes filled with tears as he read it. He had always believed the stories of a curse were a lie. He became the town's memory, the keeper of its true history. One day, the county clerk, Henderson, rode out, his curiosity having gotten the better of him. He stared, dumbfounded, at the scene. The restored depot, smoke curling from its chimney. The rising walls of the hotel. A blacksmith's forge, Jedediah's hammer ringing on an anvil. A general store, its windows freshly glazed. He saw Ilara, her face smudged with dirt, but her posture straight and confident, conferring with the head mason over a set of blueprints. Maria was unloading a wagon of supplies, and she caught his eye. "Looks like her investment is paying off," Maria called out, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Pays for everything in gold, you know. Strange for a place that's cursed." Henderson's face turned a dull, mottled red. He turned his horse around and rode away without a word, the sound of his retreat swallowed by the ringing of Jedediah's hammer. The town grew, not with a boom, but with a slow, organic solidity. It attracted people like its founder and its restorer. Quiet, competent craftspeople seeking a place where their skills were the only currency that mattered. A carpenter, a leather worker, families tired of the noise and politics of bigger cities. Terminus became a small, self-reliant island in the vastness of the plains. Then the winter came, a monster of a winter that the old-timers would speak of for decades. The snow began in November and did not stop. It buried fences, blocked roads, and brought the high plains to a standstill. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, a half-frozen Maria stumbled into the depot. She had been on her way to Terminus when she'd seen it. The evening passenger train, the Starlight Express, was stranded, its engine derailed and frozen solid in a drift about 10 miles east. The telegraph lines were down. They were alone. Panic was a useless luxury. Ilara pulled out Silas Kane's old maps. They showed the main line, but they also showed the old, forgotten spurs and access tracks the railroad had built and then abandoned. There was a maintenance track that ran within a mile of the stranded train. It was a risk, but it was the only chance. "Jedediah," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Fire up the big forge. We need to make sled runners. Elias, you know this land better than anyone. Can you guide us in a whiteout?" The old man nodded, his eyes grim but steady. "If the path exists, I can find it." They worked through the night. Ilara, using her surveying skills, plotted the most direct and stable route. Jedediah forged heavy-duty runners for 2 large freight sleds. Maria gathered every blanket, lantern, and foodstuff in the town. They set out before dawn, a small, determined party against a world of white fury. They found the train half buried in a snowdrift, a cold metal tomb. Inside, nearly 100 passengers were huddled together, their hope dwindling as the cold seeped in. When Alara and her rescue party appeared out of the swirling snow like apparitions, it was as if a miracle had occurred. They brought them all back to Terminus. The women and children were housed in the warm, solid hotel. The men bedded down in the depot and the general store. The town, built for a few dozen, now held over 100 souls. But it held them. The well did not fail. The food, carefully rationed, was enough. The stone buildings, built with integrity, held back the storm. For 3 days the blizzard raged, and for 3 days the tiny, forgotten town of Terminus was a sanctuary of life and warmth. When the storm finally broke, the story of the rescue traveled faster than any train. The railroad company, deeply embarrassed by its failure and the triumph of the town it had tried to erase, was forced to send a relief crew. Reporters came with them. They expected to find a hero, a charismatic leader. They found Alara, a quiet woman who simply showed them the work of her hands, and when pressed, told them the story was not hers. She brought out Silas Kane's journal and his geological maps. The story exploded. The ghost town that saved the Starlight Express, the engineer's daughter and the railroad's lie. The scandal of the stolen silver, confirmed by new geological surveys the railroad was forced to conduct, became a national sensation. The company, under immense public pressure, made public restitution. They paid a massive sum, not to Alara, but to a trust established for the town of Terminus, fulfilling its stolen birthright. Years passed. Terminus did not become a metropolis. It did not want to be. It remained a small, thriving town, a testament to resilience and quiet competence. The main street was no longer dirt and gravel, but neatly paved. The buildings were solid and beautiful, a marriage of old stone and new timber. It was a place where things were made, where integrity was valued, and where people who had felt adrift in the world could find a foundation. Alara lived in the restored depot, which now served as the town hall and library. Her office was the old station master's room. It was a quiet, peaceful space filled with books and maps. On the stone mantelpiece above the fireplace, 2 objects sat side by side. One was her father's brass transit theodolite, its lacquered surface gleaming in the firelight, a symbol of the skill he had given her. Next to it sat a large, beautiful, uncut piece of raw, silver ore, taken from the mine that now operated peacefully on the edge of town, a symbol of the purpose Silas Kane had passed down. Her 2 inheritances, one of knowledge, one of legacy, united in a single, quiet tableau. She had arrived with nothing but a handful of tools and the ghost of her father's wisdom. She had learned that a true inheritance is not something you are given, but something you build. It is not money, but competence. It is not a house, but a home you make with your own 2 hands. The paltry sum she had paid to a mocking clerk for a pile of ruins had been an act of desperation. But looking out her window at the living, breathing town she had helped resurrect, at the lights twinkling in the windows of her neighbors, her friends, her community, she knew with a certainty as true as the Plumbob's line that it was, without a single doubt, the best money she had ever spent.